Hey to the men. Well, it's lovely to see you all here for our first staffy at lunch.
Yeah.
Hope everybody's got their lunch. I don't. I'm pretty hungry, but I can't wait. So this will be the shortest staffy we've ever had. I just want to remind you guys, it's all about Jesus. And if you've got any leadership problems, Jesus. And that's it. That's it. That's all I got. That's all I got. All right. So I had this thought, and then I thought I'd open up for some questions as well. But last week was a simple kind of subject. It was big or small. I'm going to go on that same line today. I'm going to say yes or no. Yes or no is our subject for today. And I wanted to just do a short little kind of thought on it. And basically, I was thinking around the fact that you often hear people in this life that as they're going for a lot and they're doing a lot of things and they're trying to build these amazing empires and there's all this kind of stuff. We live in this culture where it feels like everything is do more. And there's like a lot of cram everything, like do everything. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen any of these like fast talking entrepreneurs on like TikTok or Instagram, and they're like, you wake up by 7, you start an LLC, by 9, you've already sold it, and now you've made $1 million, and before you know it, and like there's just all this kind of like just go and take over. And I think that a thought I've been pondering has been the difference between busy and effective. And I think you can be really, really busy and it feels good. Like, it feels great. You feel like, wow, my day is busy, my week is busy, my life is busy. And you feel like you're doing a lot, but the reality is busy work doesn't always equate to meaningful work. And it doesn't always mean that you have a return. It does mean though that you will go heavy on output. And if you don't manage your output and start to ask yourself whether it's bringing in good input, you eventually just end up really, really tired. And we're in this homecoming series where we're talking about rest. And so I wanted to just talk about the simplicity of yes and no. First of all, I'm going to start with a kind of lie that exists with it. And it is that I think some people feel like they're saying yes and no to something, or yes or no. But I want to say that it's kind of a silly nuance, but I want to say it's actually yes and no, not yes or no, in this sense. Every time you say yes to something, you're also saying a no to something else. So it's not yes or no, and therefore you feel like you're saying yes to a lot of people, and you're never saying no to anybody. Well, the reality is you're saying yes and no in every single scenario, okay? So if that is the case, I want to reframe the way we're thinking about some things, because we've got to realize that not everything is just a yes or a no. It's an actual yes and no in every circumstance. So, for example, you can't be a friend to everybody because you'll end up being a friend to nobody.
That's right. Yeah.
So a friendship on the left is also, you're going to say no to other friendships on the right. There comes a certain point where if you're going to commit to relationships, you can't commit to everything because of the nature of relationships. And I chose this because it's a bit more ambiguous and it's gray and it's difficult. It's like, well, what do you do here? Are you saying that you have to choose sides? Well, no, you don't always choose sides. But being a friend, according to the Bible, is about being able to say truths that sometimes are difficult. So the Bible says that faithful are the wounds of a friend, deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. I'm actually not really trying to differentiate between friend groups. I'm really asking you, are you being a good friend? And by being a good friend, you can't tell everybody they're good, everybody they're right, everybody. You have to sometimes be able to look at a friend and go, hey, you flew off the handle there, Gio, and Eva's right on this one. But what we see in our world today is we think that we can avoid conflict. But the reality is our world is a world that is going to always incur conflict. Simply by the fact that we live in proximity and we're going to bump up against each other. And so I want to encourage you as a leader, I want to encourage you to value your yes and understand that with every yes, you're also saying no. So when you're sitting there with friends and you're differentiating between different arguments and things, even at that level, I want to encourage you that a yes is also a no. And if you're going to be a good friend, you've got to be able to actually speak to the things that matter. And you can't stay neutral all the time, because at the end of the day, you're always picking a side either way. So Saying yes and no is a great revelation, because here's the other thing. I hear a lot of people saying, man, I'm just doing so much at the moment. Like, I'm giving 100% at work. I'm giving 100% at the family. I'm giving 100% in church. I'm giving 100% with my side project. And I'm giving 100% with my quiet time. So basically, you're living at somewhere around 600%. That's not really happening. So you got to start asking yourself that in every time you're saying yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. So if you're saying yes to hanging out late, you're saying no to getting up early, most probably. And if you're saying yes to reading your Bible, you're probably saying no to watching Netflix. And it's so simple, but I just think we undervalue and under-realize how these two very simple words really start to define our lives. And I want to ask you to this week, start taking an audit of your yes and your no. Because when you actually start realizing that, it actually comes down to a much deeper subject. And it is that most of us are saying yes and no based on what we think people want to hear, crowds want to hear. And some of us, out of just poor theology and religious upbringing, we're saying yeses and nos that we think God wants to hear. And they're not always the case. I think sometimes we can grow up in an environment where maybe you feel like, being a secular worker, if you will, or working outside of the four walls of the church is never really godly or never going to really build the kingdom. And so now you live in this place where you feel guilty for that kind of work. And the truth is that you're saying yes to something, but you're not giving it your full-hearted yes because it comes with connotation. And so there's a yes that we often feel God wants to hear. So we start saying more yes to church things because we think that's the only way that God becomes happy with us. And then we're inadvertently saying no to our workspaces, but our workspaces are also where God's called us. There are some people in this room that had to say no to the corporate world in order to say yes to being here. Now, both of them are ministry. So I don't know what better to call this other than to be on staff in church, but they're both ministry. And I want to encourage you in this place to work in your calling, whether that be whatever Drea does, which I can't even remember the titles, but it was impressive, or whatever it is that any of you do. How do you say yes to that with the same passion and treat your work foyer like the church foyer? And that doesn't mean we don't serve in church, but I'm just saying, are you doing what you're doing out of guilt, or are you doing it out of conviction?
Come on. That's good. Very good.
Sometimes our yes is actually not even our yes, it's our parents' yes. It's our pastor's yes. And the problem with that is this: if you don't own your yes, you'll blame someone for it.
Yeah. That's true.
If you're not owning your yes, you're going to blame someone else for it. And this even happens in marriage, guys. Like, honestly, you often can say a yes or a no because that's what your significant other maybe wants you to do. And then at the end of the day, when that scenario doesn't work out, guess what? Who are you blaming? The person that you had in the background. They weren't even present, but you were aware of them, saying your yes and your no for you. Lead yourself to say better yeses and nos, and make sure they come out of your conviction and out of what you actually believe. Because in that space, you're going to live by it better.
Very good.
I think yes and no, a few things to just consider this week as you go is just, what have you been saying yes to lately? And also, if you're honest, what does that mean you're saying no to?
Yeah.
I think that it's just a really broad strokes thought. But I just felt like God dropped it on my heart. I just keep seeing that people keep saying yes to everything under the pretense that your yes is just verbal, but your yes is not verbal. Your yes is a check, and your time has to cash it.
Wow.
So if you're saying yes everywhere, but you're not present everywhere, you're writing checks, and you're losing credibility. So make sure that the yes you say is a yes that's effective, not a yes to being more busy. Also, when you say, here's another one, make sure your yes is integrous.
Yeah.
If you're sitting in a conversation with someone and you say to them, hey, like, we're good, right? And you say yes, but you're not yes. You've devalued your yes because your yes didn't have integrity.
Yeah.
The Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Very good.
If you could be defined and known for that, you don't need to make promises, because promises are a phraseology we use to put more weight to a yes and a no that has already been undervalued.
Right.
That verse is basically saying that if you say yes and you say no, man, that's it. That's enough. Because I know Maddie. When she says yes, it's yes. And I mean it. This creates safe places. Can I even encourage you on just you being seen as a integrous person is that when you say yes, people go, there's no more to that story. As in, I remember like Ords and I, when we first got married, we often, you kind of get married and all of a sudden there's a bit of conflict sometimes, and we kind of got over the conflict. So we just started saying yes. Are you good? Yes. Yes. Are you sure you're not angry? Yes. But eventually that created like this paranoia, like you say yes, but your eyebrows are saying no, and your silence is saying no, and everything else is saying that you're not really that happy. And all of a sudden we devalued a yes out of the fact that we didn't want to really deal with what's going on. I think that as a leader, you're really known by your yes and your no. And if you want to be around people and you want to live an open book life, now there's people that you're not going to give every detail to, but to the people that matter, make sure that when they ask you, are you good? There's no more to the story.
Yeah, it's very good.
Make sure that when they ask you, are you happy? There's no more to the story. When they ask you, is that all there was? There's no more to the story. If you could be known by a very well delivered yes and no, you're going to start building character and reputation that exceeds needing to make promises, because you've actually never devalued your yes and your no. Here's another one I think needs to happen is yes with yeses and nos with longevity. I see so many people start a year or a season with a yes and a no, but the yes and the no has no longevity. Which, if there is a yes and no without longevity, it's basically a yes and a no that comes with no consistency. If I don't think your yes is going to stand or your no is going to stand, it's not really got any consistency. And all I know is that yes, you might justify it, and yes, you might change it, but I just don't know how to predict your yes and no. It is just like the weather. It may or may not happen. So a yes with longevity is also in alignment with the way that God moves, Like God's not going to tell you no dating for the whole year and then 2 weeks in you're dating.
That's it.
God's not going to say no to you start your year's resolution, you're saying, I'm just saying no to like being super busy. And then you catch up with your friend 5 months in and you're like, I haven't seen my family in a while. But you said that you weren't going to get super busy.
Very good.
So a no and a yes that has longevity needs this. You actually need to take account and understand the cost of your yes and your no.
Yes.
When you understand the cost of your yes and your no, all of a sudden you start to be a little bit more frugal with your yes and no's. I would rather somebody say, let me see, I'm not sure about it, maybe, I've got to think about it, let me go back and assess. Those people have respect, because what that is telling you is that when they go away, they've got a yes and a no that's been thought through.
That's good.
Just a yes and a no with longevity will make you a better leader. In the workplace, with your bosses, guys, does your boss get the right yes from you with longevity? Like, does your boss count on you? As a Christian, are you the first person in the workplace that somebody comes to and says, I need help?
Yes.
Or your boss goes, I can rely on you?
Yes.
I think sometimes we undervalue our work ethic outside of the Sunday service, when really Sunday should be fueling better Mondays.
Yes. Come on.
Yeah.
And I think with that, this is for those that are living in the dual space of you feel called to the four walls of church, but you're also now in a corporate space or in a whatever, you're working somewhere. Be open about what your eternal yes is, so that they know how to navigate your daily no.
That's very, very good.
When you have an actual, so when I was, I took on this advertising job, and straight away I told them, like within 3 days, I was like, hey, so I feel called to Bible college. Like I want to be a pastor one day. And so that's got my forever yes, which means that like I will be faithful here, but I just want you to know that like I've committed to whatever. I think I had to do 6 months at the beginning. I was on probation, and then I could do beyond. I just want you to know that that's my commitment. But like, I know you've invited me to a few after work hours, but it conflicts with this. It's not because I don't want to be part of work culture. I just want you to know that whenever I say no, it's because I've got a bigger yes.
Yeah, that's good.
Bigger for me.
Yes, right.
Because I don't want to denote that my yes is bigger than theirs, but I just want to let you, as far as my concern goes, that's the biggest yes in my life. So therefore, a yes to that is a no to this. When you know that, I think you start to build this yes that is respectful in a workplace, because they know where to place you. And I think that's a really great way to navigate some of the things. But then you also got to understand that conversely, in church, help your leader and help your oversight by saying, currently I'm in a dual season. So I have two people that have a yes and a no from me. I can't always say yes in this environment, and therefore I have to say no sometimes. Now, why is this so important? It's so important because quite often we want people to say our yes and no for us because we don't want to upset somebody with our yes and no. And so all of a sudden we start coming up with phraseology that's like this, well, they should know. How should they know? They don't know your capacity. No one knows your limits. No one knows what you can or can't do. Man, you put 10 people to work and everyone can do it at a different rate. Change the task and the order of who can do it better and who can do it more changes again. Change the day, change the month, change the season, and everything changes. Please keep people up to date with where you're tracking by a yes and a no.
Yeah, it's good.
Having a good, well-placed yes and no makes you a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
Having a good, well-placed no in a dual season is an incredible way to show where you're aligned, but also where you're faithful. You always want to let them know where you're aligned, but you also got to be faithful in the season that you're in. Make sure your yes and your no are really great. Third thing is have a predictable yes and a predictable no. As you build a reputation, you should have a predictable yes and a predictable no. I remember that it was a predictable yes pre-Jesus that Chris Carmona was going to hit the clubs with you. Like it was going to happen. And it was a predictable yes, I was going to drink until there was nothing left to drink in front of me or the club shut down. Like that was just my way of, that's the way I was. Then all of a sudden I get saved. And I remember one of my best friends actually, he was like, he was so upset that I got saved because he was awesome. Because he was a pastor's kid. And he was like, man, I literally made friends with you because I thought you'd never get saved. And I just never wanted to end up with a Christian friend. And so he basically, made friends, and then I got saved, and I started saying no because I kept saying yes to church. So I was saying yes to go to Sunday services or yes to go to a youth thing, and therefore I was saying no to going to a clubbing thing situation. And you know what ended up happening? They actually started to not ask me because my yes and my no was predictable.
Yeah.
And on the other side, I wanted to become predictable in church. So my leaders started asking me to pick up people. They started asking me to move this, to lead this team, to show up to this. Can you open these doors? Because my yes became predictable in my new environment.
Yeah.
I want to have a predictable yes. And I had to help my family also understand my predictable yes. Because my predictable yes became this thing where they started putting birthdays on Sundays. And I was like, hey guys, like this is not something that I'm doing as just a religious thing. Like I feel called to this. So my Sundays are determined. And I remember one of my family members said, well, that's not fair. Like that, I want to celebrate my birthday on Sunday. And I said, that's okay. As long as you understand that my next birthday, I'm going to celebrate it on Monday. And if you don't come from work, I'm going to be very upset. And they understood my point. So now that might not work for everybody. I am a certain way. But they started to understand that my life had a predictable yes. Here's the thing. When they coupled that with a yes with longevity, it breeds respect. When you have a predictable yes and a yes with longevity, it starts to breed respect.
Yeah, it's true.
And most people will start putting more weight on what you do because of the way you do it and for the amount of time you do it and with the amount of consistency that you do it. Your yes and your no are so defining, and they're often living in absolute parallels together. Every yes is a no to something else. Having a yes that is predictable, I think, is really, 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 really huge. On this concept as well of yes and no, I want to just go through some small ones. And if you're new to Staffy, I want to let you know so you know what to expect. This is always a leadership thing. So I'm speaking to things in our culture that I want our leaders to get good at. If you're coming here for deep biblical teaching, that's not what this is. This is literally about the operations of our church and the function. I invite everybody because I feel the concepts we talk about would make you a better worker, a better CEO, a better manager, a better leader in your workplace. But that's what it is, just so you know. But here are a few things that your yes should already say come with a no to, and so that you understand. And the reason I'm putting it out there is because how many times have you said yes to something not realizing it was a no to something else, and then you feel cheated? My kids do it all the time. Like they'll say, Dad, can I have this soda? And then I'm like, I thought they realized that we were trying to monitor their sugar intake. And when they have 4 sodas and then they go, can I have dessert? I'm like, you said no to dessert at that 4th soda.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, if I would have known, I wouldn't have said yes to the soda. And I'm like, fair enough. That's my bad. From now on, I tell them. So when they eat something during the day and they go for that donut, I'm like, just know that a yes to that donut is a no to dessert.
Right.
Or one of them was like upset because they fought to go out with one of the grandparents, and then someone else did something, like went to a theme park, and they were like, oh my God. It's like, well, yeah, you said yes to this. So it's a no to that. And what I love about it is it's teaching them the economy of time, the economy of finance, and the economy of priorities. We just too often say a blind yes, and then we then try to say yes to the inverted no. For example, as a Christian, the minute you say yes to Jesus, you say yes to grace, which means you say no to bitterness.
Yeah. Come on.
Because bitterness is when you hold someone without forgiveness. Grace is when you understand that people are human and you are meeting them at their humanity because you yourself have experienced your own.
Yeah.
Bitterness is usually the function of blindness.
Yeah.
You are blind to what you have done and what you caused, so therefore you hold people to something that they have done. And bitterness is often the cause of blindness, because what we don't realize is that when we said yes to Jesus, we said yes to grace. And if we said yes to grace, we say no to bitterness.
Yeah.
Come on.
But what often happens is when you've got 2 yeses that you give, it's the equivalent of a double scheduling type thing. When you double up a schedule and 2 people show up for the same meeting, but you can't talk to those 2 people for the same meeting because it's a completely different meeting. You got pastoral care and you got another thing. Well, how often do we sit at the table with both grace and offense? But they're not friends.
Right. Come on.
A yes to one is a no to the other. So when we understand that, we start to, and just know this about Christianity. A yes doesn't come with an automatic yes in the heart.
Right. That's so true.
I've said yes to grace, but I've got to therefore make sure that my no to offense catches up. Yes is where I camp and I pull everything in my life up to my yes. Or I can say my yes, and if it's completely the opposite of the first half of this staffy, then I'll pull my yes down to my new one. If that makes sense, right? So if I say yes to grace, I don't feel like giving grace all the time, but I pull my emotions up to that. I pull my offense up to that, and I make it get reconciled to the yes that I gave to grace. Therefore, everything shifts that way. So if I say yes to that, that's what I'm saying yes to, right? It's that's an important factor of it. So a yes to grace is a no to offense, I think. Here's another thing that I think is yes to your family time is often a no to your work. We often talk about balance, right? And we go, oh, it's all a pie chart. Well, it's not really a pie chart. I just think that whatever you're doing right now should be your priority. So it's your most important yes. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that your marriage isn't important. It just means that right now, if your marriage was the most important thing, you'd be there. But you're not. You're in a boardroom at that moment.
Yeah, very good.
Or in that moment, you're doing a pastoral counseling. That's what it looks like. In that moment, you're fully in that moment. So why am I putting this out there? Because as leaders in our church, I've noticed that the work, ministry, life balance hasn't been working. And I think that there's a lot of thinking that we're the Jesus answer to things that will always need an answer.
Right. Yeah. That's good. It's good.
For example, there's always going to be an after hours call. There's always going to be a crisis, and there's always going to be a moment. If I want to forever say yes to the crisis, eventually I'm going to be saying no to my kids.
Right.
I've got to say yes to the amount of yeses I have. And I've got a limited amount of yeses to crisis because I've also given yeses the day that we chose to bring children into this world. And so far they love God and they love the church, and I want to keep it that way.
Yes, that's really good.
So therefore that means that an after hours text about work has my no,
Yeah.
because I want to do that well.
Yeah.
But it also means that my kids don't have my yes during the day all the time, because if I do this well, I'm framing a world that is a much bigger yes for them later.
Yeah.
So understanding that it's okay to live compartmentalized according to time is a good thing, because what you're doing is you're saying, this is the time I'm prioritizing this, and this is the time I'm prioritizing this. If this gets my yes for a while, the rest of the world gets my no.
Yeah.
That is a really good way to live your life, no matter what happens. Because if you don't do that, you'll find yourself on call after call under the lie that this is the last time I'll take one.
Yeah.
This is the last time I'll do it. This is a special circumstance. No, they're always special.
Yeah.
They're always special. But that means that we often overlook how special it is to just sit at a dinner table in front of your kids. That is also special. And it's not just special because it's a moment, it's a special because it builds something. And it creates kids that'll stick around. Know that it's okay to say yes and no and manage them well. So also with that, I'll just say, let's create a world where we respect people's yeses and nos from that perspective. I think that sometimes not getting a text message back in today's world, being left on red is the equivalent of like just mutiny. It's like, oh my God, they hate me. No, a text message is one of the most intrusive things in the world, I think.
Yeah.
It's as if I could knock on your door at any hour and expect a response.
Yeah.
So I think there's this thing that if we're going to do ministry, just understand that somebody not texting you after 6 or something of that nature, it's because they've got other lives, and that's okay. So let's like respect that and be good with it. Now, I think if you haven't responded to a text in 48 hours or 24 hours, that's something. If you're within your work hours and you're not getting back to text messages, that's something else. There's also people in my world that get my yes straight away. There's very few, but they get my answer straight away. Anyone in my grow group, if they say emergency or like they say this is important, they get my yes no matter where we are. We'll interrupt a dinner and our anniversary because we've allotted yeses for them. But we can't live that way for everyone. So when someone comes up to me in the foyer and they're like, hey, can we catch up? I can't catch up. Not because I think I'm awesome. I just don't have time because I'm actually assessing my yeses, and I don't want to live so stretched that eventually my yes to everything becomes a no to effectiveness.
Yeah.
So just a small thought. I know it's kind of, raw, but I wanted to bring it because I felt like we live in this world where we want to achieve a lot and we confuse that excellence is constantly saying yes. And I think that, actually, here's one last thing I'll say, is a realistic yes will actually define and create good leadership because it leads to replication. I think what we often do is we want to get the accolades for doing something well. So in this world, we say yes to tasks, and we often, the more yes you say to a task, the more no you're saying to a replication of a leader. Because the more you do it, the less you're building someone else. So every time you take it on, because your lie is that it's better to do it, if I want it done well, I'll do it myself, or I got to do it because otherwise it won't work. Basically what you're saying is you're saying yes to a job for the rest of your life. I will have this task on my plate forever. But if you actually start to understand that you have a limited amount of yeses and nos, but you still have the same calling on your life, that means you have to embrace influence, and influence is your ability to lead through people, not lead through task. If you lead through task, you're gonna be limited. If you learn how to lead through people, you realize that you're actually going to now have a limited bunch of yeses of tasks, because most of your yes should be teaching an Eva or a Geo on how to do things. Here's the other thing. A yes to building a leader is not yes to developing a skill set. It's developing a person.
Yes.
Yeah.
If all you're doing is passing somebody on a skill set, well, guess what? That skill set is as good as that person is healthy. So your best investment and return on investment is get that person healthy, and the task will carry itself. That is the best way to do it. Another way to put it is this: the best way to build a boat is not get people passionate about boat building. Get people passionate about the ocean, and the boat will build itself.
Yes.
You want to build a good team in church?
Come on.
Get people passionate about Jesus.
Yes.
If they're passionate about Jesus, they'll build your team incredibly.
Yes.
The greatest mistake Shannon could make is to try build a business team with people that are passionate about business. No. She needs people that are skilled in business, but she needs them passionate about the kingdom.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
If she spends more time getting them passionate about the kingdom, the rest of it, yeah, that's skill sets. You got manuals for that. You can teach people how to do some things. But I'll tell you what, it is harder to teach an unmotivated person
Yes.
than to aim someone with motivation.
Yeah. Come on.
Someone with motivation will end up teaching. They'll actually outlearn. Their learning capacity is greater than your teaching. Have you ever done that? You get someone in a role and they're so pumped, they're so passionate that they come back to you about things they learned versus things you taught them.
Come on. Yeah. Yes.
And you're like, oh, yeah, I was going to teach you that for sure. Yeah, that's great. Wow. Show me, what's that book again? And then you start reading it because you're like, wow, this person's on fire.
Yeah.
Get people passionate about the purpose. And if you're in a corporate space, ask yourself not what is the bottom line or what is the simplicity of the task. Ask yourself with the people in your corporate space team, what really makes them tick and how does this add value to the thing that they think they're made to do?
Very good question.
If you're in the corporate space, think about it this way. Don't think make a good work environment that fulfills their desires and their needs. You may not have them forever, but you might be able to keep them forever by asking them this simple question.
So true.
If you could do anything, what would you do? And if you could work for any company, what would it be? What would you do and why? Now, take that and understand that the company only has their allegiance of the dream because they think that's where they can fulfill it. But if you, as their oversight, were able to offer them the very same things, if they could fulfill that purpose where you are and get the same things, and you could bring vision into that place and you build the person, you'll build a great team because you've got them passionate about something deeper than the task. No one in church wants to do logistics. No one is simply passionate about seating people in chairs. What they are passionate about maybe is facilitating a moment where people say yes to Jesus. So if you're building the host team and all you're talking about is logistics on how you get people in and out, you missed it.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the fact that, hey, if we could put the right people in the right chairs, and then you start adding vision and you think, man, what if we started to create community around the sections of our seating, because people always sit in the same areas, and how can they sit in the same areas in church every week but not know the people they sit next to?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to pitch an idea to the Grow Groups team. What if we started to think about people that pastored sections? It's funny how vision drives innovation,
Yeah.
and it takes a task to becoming something with purpose.
Yeah.
Say yes to developing the person and you'll build a good team.
Yeah.
Which means this, if you're developing the person, you're not just asking them where they were, you're asking them how they are.
Yes.
Start building good teams by having a better sense of what your yes and your no really does. You're not saying yes to leadership. When you're saying yes to leadership, you're not saying yes to a title. You're saying yes to building people.
Yeah.
And if you understand that yes well, then you're saying no to being the best. You're saying no to being at the top in the sense of being the first to be right and all those things. A yes to leadership is saying no to those things and saying yes to finding the best idea, elevating the best gift, and keeping people heard. If you could do that, I promise you, you'll build good teams. If you could go through this week and assess your yes and no, you're probably going to find that you've said yes too many places. And some of the yeses are not bringing a return worth doing. No is one of the greatest things. And I'll cap off by saying this. This concept comes with tiers. There's tiers of yeses and nos. The best way to navigate this is not start from the bottom up. The best way to navigate this is start from the top down. Which is the greatest yes that the Holy Spirit is asking of you in this season? Ultimately, what is the yes that Jesus is going to hold you accountable to when you go back home? You know, there's this beautiful thought. I actually preached a message in the early days of People Church, and I spoke about the gates, because as Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall, when you look at that, they're actually rebuilding gates first. And the gates are very specific, and they come in order. And you've got the sheep gate, you've got the fish gate, you've got the waste gate, you've got the inspection gate, which is really cool, and the east gate. What's really cool about the inspection gate and the east gate is that the east gate is the one that the Messiah is supposed to come back through, right? That's the thing. The king would come back after battle through the east gate. But once he came back through the east gate, once he came back through the east gate, the inspection gate was there. The inspection gate was when he actually looked at all his soldiers and he gave them the rewards that they would do according to the work they did in battle. Now that is a really beautiful picture, because when you think that the Messiah is going to come back, and that's when we then will be at the inspection gate. At that inspection gate, the number one thing you're going to be accountable for is what you did with your salvation and your yes that he called you to have, aka your calling. Your calling is the number one thing that should get your yes. And when that happens, everything else flows well. Obviously, there's other constructs that come under that when you're married, but obviously, Ords and I, we understand that our calling is more than just building the church. It's our home, our church must be a reflection of our home. So I must have kids on fire for God, and I must have a marriage that's moving, and these things are things we should strive for and move for. But I want to encourage you that if you could navigate that, it might mean that by this time next year, you might be in a different career. Because maybe you've been saying yes to something because you feel like a no just to what you're doing now and a yes to what God wants you to do, it's too late. I'll tell you this, if God's still impressing it on your heart, it's never too late. And a God yes should also make your heart skip a beat or two because it actually needs faith. And so I want to encourage you that your yes be, driven out of faith. And then I'll close out by just saying, and then maybe we've got questions on the practicalities on how people we've got so many great people on this call that do lives in all sorts of different arenas, and people at this table that you might want to ask them how they navigate their yes and their no. And we'll do that in a second. But can I just say this? Guard your yes and make sure that you don't turn into somebody that reflects the church of Ephesus in the book of Revelation, where they were saying yes to all the right things, but they lost the right heart towards the main thing, and they get challenged, and it says, hey, I love that you hate this, I love that you do this, but you've lost your first love. And I want to encourage you that you want to stay in love with your yes, and if your yes had a wow when you first said it, I hope it's still got a wow now. If you feel called to ministry, I hope it's still a privilege. If you're called to the corporate space, I hope it's still a privilege. I hope it's still a privilege to be married, to be a father, to be a mother, to serve, wherever you do it. If God asks you for a yes for a year, make sure it's a yes with joy.
Yes, that's good.
Because remember, the Bible says that He loves a cheerful giver, and it's not just talking about finance. So don't give your yes out of obedience, but at the same time, your obedience comes with attitude. Because literally, I actually get my kids in trouble at any moment where they give me a yes with attitude. Their yes must be more than, it's far more than skin deep. Their yes must come with a good character, with a good attitude, because otherwise what they're saying is yes with their lips, but no with their heart.
Really great.
So make sure your yes is still as passionate, is still as guarded, is still as good, is still as kind, still as joyful, still as grace-filled, still as privileged as it was the first day you gave it. Because maybe what that means is you didn't count the cost of your yes, and now you're feeling a bit gypped for it.
Wow. Incredible. Come on, guys. Incredible.
That's yes and no. Two definers that I think will build your life really well.
Yeah.
Any questions for anyone in the room? Mr. Fields! Love him.
Well, Pastor, once again, your timing of your talk is incredible. So I'm every Monday morning we have a leadership team meeting in this organization, and here's the challenge. So it's hard enough for me to do the yes and no, myself. That's challenging enough. But when you lead an organization or a team, the challenge I'm finding is that they say yes to a lot of things that feel good, that are cool, that are glittery and gold and silver, but they're not what's most important to the organization.
Love that.
We need them focusing on what matters most, our priorities, our objectives, and the things that really move the ball down the field. And it's really challenging to get them to align to that when these are business professionals. And so what suggestions do you have as far as keeping people aligned on what matters most? Even if it's not the most fun thing to do, but it's what matters most for the cause.
Yes. Man, Eric, that is a brilliant question. And it is actually a question I'm incredibly passionate about. And it is something that we shifted towards resolving and was a real pain point for years, for a whole year for me. And it started around 2018. I went actually traveling and asking 2018, I think, or 2019, I traveled to every church conference, to every pastor's gathering to ask that question. And no one really had an answer for me. And so I kind of fell in love with it. And this is my short and ish answer to it. It is that priorities are a function of values. And so if you don't share common values in a company, you'll never share common priorities. And so if they value their own thing, if they've got their own sets of values and they don't have company values, then the reality is they're always going to make decisions according to their values. And it could be as simple as their personal value is greater than the company value. If the company value is we win as a team, but their personal value is I get promoted, then they're never going to make the same priorities as you want them to, which then leads to two things. My father, who I'm so proud of, he started off as a cleaner in Australia, who had a ninth grade education, ended up becoming a CEO of many companies to the point where once he led, I think he had 30,000 employees underneath him. And one of the things that stuck with me, my dad always said, is if you can't change your people, change your people. And so one of the things that often has to happen is we have to set values at the very top. We have to bring a lot of why. This is not a ship that turns around quickly. It's not a speedboat. It's turning around a cruise liner. And what we have to do is preach, teach, and hold these values over the course of time. And the goal that I would set is in a year from now, what would be the delivery system? As in, how are you going to bring these values to the table? And then over the course of a year, where do you want to be? And hopefully in a year from now, your team is making more aligned yeses, because our values are what dictate our thoughts, our emotional responses, and our actions. And so when we start valuing things different at the top as a company, and we start preaching this and speaking this and bringing a lot of why and vision and heart, I'll tell you, Eric, that when they start getting it, you'll be sick of saying it, and they'll only just start getting it. But as you do that, what you'll do is you'll be able to reference things as well. Like, hey, I love that you did that, but what we value here is this. And if they have a line of promotion, or if they want to move in that company, what they're going to start understanding is, oh, the way we do things in this family is what we value. And as we do that, there are other functional things that help, like running through milestones and sprints. Milestones are when we break down the meaningful work into quarters, and we tell people the number one objective that we're aiming for, so everyone's aligned on the common goal. I think the biggest misconception with goals in any organization is that we think that they're very clearly expressed and that everybody understands them. And that is also the fallacy of communication, is that it actually took place. So how you said it might not be how they hear it. So we've got to say it in multiple different ways. It must be clear, and it must be something we align to through milestones with weekly roundups that we keep going. This is what we're running for. And the last thing I'll say is the very things, and we do it every single staff, we do it every meeting in People Church. What you replicate will be according to what you celebrate. So every time you celebrate the value you want to see, it'll be a value that then starts to get replicated. I always think that out of the simplicity of, I got sick of my mum cooking incredible meals. And then I'd say, Ma, how'd you cook it? And she'd go, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I never got the meal again. And it's because we often will critique something for what's missing, but we don't often stop to celebrate what went right. And what went right is what made the recipe what it was. So as you celebrate these good values, they start to become values that get replicated, because people do want to be celebrated.
Yeah.
That's my thought. That's my answer. It might not be the only answer or the best answer, but it's the way we've moved towards that.
Yeah, spot on, crushed it, thank you.
That was so good.
Short, sharp, and I loved it. Any other questions, thoughts on a yes and no from any level? I mean, there's people in this room that are doing dating seasons, have done dating seasons, engagement seasons, all sorts of seasons that require yeses and nos. It's a wealth in this room and call. I'd encourage you to use it. Is there any questions at all?
I have so many thoughts. Can you all hear me? Okay.
We can hear you.
I'm trying on new headphones. Okay, cool. Man, I want to talk or hear more about developing and or communicating your no from a couple of different standpoints. One, I've observed like in this setting, like people don't want to say no when you ask a question of them or ask them for help, because they love you, they like you, they want to be, they want to serve, they want to honor, but I think it sometimes could lead to burnout, just an example. And or I think personally, like being someone who has outward like a fear of man, people pleasing, like sometimes it's hard to say no. So wanting to hear more maybe Shannon, pastors, just about developing and communicating if this is like beyond yes I can give, or I really need to say no because I've done this assessment and I don't have the yes to give in this context.
I'll just say this. Yes and no can both be rude if they're not done with tact and explanation.
Yeah.
Tact and explanation are a really beautiful thing, and they add a lot of value on the person you're explaining to, because not everybody deserves an explanation, so therefore the people you give it to are now valued. If you value your leader and you value your wife and you value people, you don't just say yes and no. You explain your yes and your no. A yes that is explained is a yes that is trusted, and a no that is explained is a no that is received. So that would be my greatest thing that I'd encourage you to do. Just look back at me.
I think more conversations around the value and looking at your yes and no from a what you said economic perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also like teaching people that your yes has weight and your no has weight and your why has weight as well. And I think we can be so flippant with our yes and our no's, and I think in general we could be very flaky human beings, so therefore our yeses and our no's can be super flaky. But I think having a standard around our yes and our no will really help people use their yes and their no accordingly, use it with wisdom, use it with a sense of measuring. You know, how is this yes right now going to impact, you know, what I can do in the next day or two or the week or the month? You know, I think your yes is not, and I think when you start to decipher your yes and no's, you decipher from that perspective of how much output is this actually going to take from me, and can I do this? I actually can do this. So yes, you have my yes and you have a strong yes from me. And so I think you've got to calculate and measure when you say yes or no, and also be open to challenge, because I think people as leaders, when somebody just gives us a no, we're like, okay, well, they can't do it. But sometimes a little pushback will kind of give a little bit of an understanding into their yes and no. You can help disciple or help coach or help lead them into, no, you have capacity for this. You're saying no out of fear. You're saying no because you're bogged down, but you're carrying the wrong way, or you're carrying the wrong things, or you're saying yes to other things that are not highly effective. So
I love that, because when you started saying that, it got me thinking about, I think there's so much merit and fruit when you discuss your yes and no. Because what I've learned is, as I discuss my yes and no, some people help me turn my no into a yes, and other people have helped me turn my yes into a no, and I've been saved in both scenarios.
So true.
You know, like I've got a friend I call about a lot of like my financial decisions when it comes to houses and trying to invest and stuff, and I'll call him and you know, I was ready to give a yes, and then he talks me through it, and I'm like, oh, that's a no. That's a no. And then there's other people where I go, man, I can't do this, and they're like, actually, if you just do this, this, and that, it's a yes. And I found that to have so much value in my life. I think quite often we don't do it when we're guarded and we're afraid of our yes and no being challenged, because we don't really know that it's a yes and no. It's a heart yes and no, not a head yes and no.
That's good.
And so we often don't run, and it happens in the simplest of levels. You don't run a financial decision by somebody that might tell you no. Like if you want that jacket and you just kind of, you're going to do it. Because I think one of the best things you could do as a leader, Brianna, as well, is like, hey guys, not with everyone, right? Like with the people you trust. I feel like, I love that you've asked me to do this, but I just don't see how I could do it. So this is what my no is made up of. This is what I took into account. Am I missing something? And what I always say, that contrast and confirmation build definition. So the way that you can trust that you make good marriage decisions is when you talk to someone that has a good marriage and they affirm your decisions. When you talk to someone that has good financial fruit and you run your financial fruit like ideas by them and they go, that's a good financial decision, you start to build a few of those and you start going, oh yeah, okay, I'm not on my own. Because the worst thing you could do is, because my dad, I'd fail math test after math test, and my dad would be like, you didn't know you were getting it wrong? And I was like, no, if I knew I was getting it wrong, I wouldn't have done it. Like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time we think our idea is a great idea
Yeah.
until someone with better fruit in that area can go, that's actually not a good idea.
Right.
And they educate you. But then as you start making decisions in alignment with a lot of people, not just one, but a lot of people that have that same fruit, then all of a sudden you start to trust your ideas, and that's where you get definition to what is good and what is bad through the contrast of somebody and the confirmation of somebody else. And so talk your yes and no out, I think, is a really, really good practice.
I think another, just a quick example. So when I was in Bible college, I had my grow group leader who was a great leader. Her name was Susana Campos, and she would throw me these projects all the time. Like, she was raising me to be her 2IC. And I was in college, I was, managing my finances and doing all the things. And some of the projects that she would throw my way, I would have to front the money, and I would never sometimes get paid back for them. And I was saying yes to all these projects out of fear of saying no, because I didn't want to let her down, but at the same time, it was making me broke, and I was getting frustrated, and it started making me feel bitter towards her. And that whole concept, I never resolved it well, but then it bled onto my relationship with my senior pastors, and it's like this whole, well, they should know I'm busy, and they should know that I've got so much on. But if you're saying yes, 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 your leader's only giving you more because you keep saying yes, yes, yes.
Right.
So you have to make sure that you're giving the right signals and you're communicating effectively, so your leaders, you don't turn on your leaders and you become embittered towards them because of your yes and your no. It's your responsibility to share those concerns with them, so that you don't end up becoming bitter,
Yeah.
So I just,
And that's in a relationship too.
Yeah.
Like, hey honey, can you do this? Yes, 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 yes. But and the whole time you're thinking, they don't see how many things I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm doing all these things and they don't see it.
Yeah.
Well, you got to understand that your yes is directly correlated to how you feel in that week. You might have had a week where you're just tired, more tired than usual. Or you might be at the end of your capacity, and that's okay. But you got to share that, because you'll get, just as she said in that leadership construct, but it's marriage applicable, friendship applicable, mum and dad applicable. Just your yes and no is such a simple word, man, but it comes with so much drama if you don't navigate it well.
I'd add just one thing on the subject of the fear of rejection of man. Similar to what they were saying, spark the idea of, like, if you keep running against the same yes or no that makes you nervous about it, dig into that and pray for that, because that usually for me is like, there's a root of that fear, that rejection, that every time that scenario comes up and I'm too afraid to go say my yes or no, or like it's more of a struggle than what I find, usual, that for me usually highlights like, this should be yes, a weighted yes or no, but why am I struggling with it more than what feels normal?
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I would definitely like keep track of what seems to be the hard with. It could be a specific person even. You're fine saying yes or no to someone, but every time you have to say it to that specific person, there could be something there that you're like, man, I have such a fear of letting them down or something, whatever that word is. So tracking those themes across there as well.
It's great, Shannon.
Yeah, really good. Well, guys, I don't know about you, but I thoroughly enjoyed Staffy today. So good to see so many of you on. I love that we switched it to this time. For a minute there, I was like, uh-oh, we're not going to have anyone. And everyone came in. So fantastic. You guys are awesome. Ian Arunga, I'm just going to put it out there. He looks like he could ride a horse. He looks like Rip from Yellowstone. He's a tough man. And I'm just going to put it out there. Okay? All right. Love you all.